Your 4-year-old looks up at you and asks, "Why is the sky blue?" And here's what I need you to do. Don't answer. Don't explain. Don't teach. Don't Google it and read them the scientific explanation. Just don't answer. I know. Every good parent instinct you have is screaming right now. That's terrible advice. Questions mean they're curious. Curiosity should be rewarded. If I don't answer, I'm shutting down their learning. But stay with me. Because what I'm about to show you is practiced in the highest performing schools in Italy, backed by cognitive development research. And it creates independent thinkers instead of answer-dependent kids, which is probably the opposite of what's happening in your house right now. Teachers in Reggio Emilia, that's in northern Italy, discovered something about how children's brains actually learn that most Western parents completely miss. Harvard researchers confirmed it. Montessori educators have been using it for decades. And once you understand why answering every question is actually slowing down your child's cognitive development, you'll never respond to why the same way again. Here's what most of us do when our child asks a question. They ask, "Why do dogs bark?" You answer, "Well, sweetie, dogs bark to communicate. They're telling us things. Maybe they're hungry, or they hear something, or they want to play." They ask, "Why do we have to sleep?" You explain, "Because our bodies need rest. While we sleep, our brain organizes memories and our muscles recover, and we grow." They ask, "Why can't I have candy for breakfast?" You rationalize, "Because candy has sugar, and sugar gives you energy really fast. But then you crash, and you need protein and healthy food to help you focus at school." Sound familiar? And it feels like good parenting, right? Your child is curious, they're asking, you're teaching, you're giving them knowledge, you're being present and engaged and educational. That's what we were all taught. Answer their questions, feed their curiosity, be the source of information. But here's what's actually happening. Step 1. Your child asks a question, but they're not really asking for information. They're testing a pattern. If I say why, does the adult perform? Do I get attention? Do I get a show? Step 2, you deliver the answer, and their brain receives the message. I don't need to think. I just need to ask. The answer comes from outside me. Step 3, the questions increase. Not because they're more curious, because they've learned a strategy. Why equals attention. Why equals mom stops what she's doing. Why equals a story, a connection, a performance. And now you're answering 200 why questions a day. You're exhausted. And your child isn't actually learning how to think. They're learning how to outsource thinking. If you've been doing this, if you've felt like a walking encyclopedia, if you've Googled answers while your kid waits, if you've wondered why the questions never stop, you're not failing. You're doing exactly what our culture taught you to do. But there's a much better way. Here's where Italian educators, cognitive researchers, and Montessori teachers figured out something completely different. Picture this: a classroom in Reggio Emilia, Italy. A 5-year-old boy is staring at a snail crawling across a leaf. He looks up at his teacher and asks, "Why does the snail have that shell?" The teacher doesn't answer. She doesn't explain about protection or calcium or evolution. Instead, she crouches down next to him, looks at the snail with him, and says, "Why do you think?" The boy pauses, stares at the snail. "Maybe because it's his house?" She nods. "Maybe. What else could it be? Maybe it keeps him safe from birds." "Could be. How could we find out?" The boy thinks. "We could watch the snail, see what happens when a bird comes." She smiles. "That's an excellent plan." No answer. No explanation. No closure. Just an invitation to think. And that 5-year-old just activated a completely different part of his brain than if she'd given him the answer. Italian teachers don't rush to answer questions. They reflect questions back, because they understand something about how the brain actually builds thinking skills. When you give a child an answer, you activate their memory storage. They file it away. Maybe they remember it. Probably they don't. But either way, you've done the cognitive work for them. When you turn the question back, you activate their prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, problem solving, and critical thinking. You force their brain to make connections, generate hypotheses, test ideas. One builds a mental filing cabinet. The other builds a thinking machine. And here's the key. Children don't actually want answers. They want engagement. They want your attention. They want to feel connected. The question is just the strategy. And if you give attention to the question by answering, you reinforce the strategy. But if you give attention by inviting them into the thinking process, you reinforce curiosity itself. Questions that get answers close. Questions that get questions back open. I'm going to call this the curiosity reflect method. It's called reflect because instead of filling their mind with your answer, you reflect their question back so they fill their own mind with their thinking. I need to warn you, this is going to feel wrong at first. You'll feel like you're withholding, like you're being unhelpful, like a good parent would just answer. That discomfort is exactly why most parents accidentally train their kids to stop thinking for themselves. I'm going to walk you through 5 simple steps. And I want you to pay attention to what happens in your child's brain at each stage. Because when you see how this builds actual intelligence instead of just information storage, you'll understand why Italian kids score higher on creative problem solving than almost any other country. Ready? Let's break it down. Step 1. Receive the question with interest. Your child asks, "Why is the sky blue?" You don't ignore it. You don't dismiss it. You don't say, "Not now, honey." You stop. You make eye contact. You show them their question matters. You say, "Ooh, that's a great question." Why? Because you're separating the question from the answer. You're validating the curiosity without performing the answer. You're teaching them, your wondering matters. Your thinking is valuable. That's 5 seconds. That's all it takes. Step 2, reflect it back. Now, here's where it feels weird. You say, "Why do you think the sky is blue?" Not as a test, not in a condescending way, with genuine curiosity. You're handing the question back to them. Most kids will pause here because they're used to you doing the work. They're waiting for the performance. But their brain is doing something incredible in that pause. It's scanning for connections. It's pulling from memory. It's building a hypothesis. You've just activated their prefrontal cortex. That's 10 seconds. And you've already done more for their cognitive development than answering ever could. Step 3, wait. Actually wait. This is where most parents panic and jump in. Well, it's because of the way light number. You wait. You let the silence do its work. Your child's brain is problem solving. Let it problem solve. After 10, 15, 20 seconds, they'll offer something. Maybe because it's made of water? Maybe because God painted it? Maybe because the sun makes it that color? It doesn't matter if it's right. What matters is they generated a thought. Step 4, validate the thinking, not the accuracy. Here's what you don't say. "No, that's not right." Here's what you do say. "Interesting. You're thinking about water and color. Tell me more about that." Or, "Ooh, you connected it to the sun. What made you think of that?" You're rewarding the process, the effort, the hypothesis generation. You're teaching them thinking is valuable. Wrong guesses are part of learning. Your brain is doing great work. When you do this, their brain releases dopamine, not because they got the right answer, because they engaged in the process. And dopamine makes them want to do it again. Step 5, invite discovery together. Now, only now, you offer a bridge to learning. That's such interesting thinking. Want to find out together? Should we look it up and see? How could we figure that out? Notice what you're not doing. You're not being the answer. You're being the guide to discovery. And now, when you look it up together, or experiment together, or explore together, they're invested because it was their question, their hypothesis, their curiosity that led here. The answer lands differently because they worked for it. Here's what this looks like in real life. Without the curiosity reflect method, your child asks, "Why do birds fly?" You explain lift and wings and hollow bones. They say, Okay, and run off. 30 seconds later. Why is grass green? You explain photosynthesis. Okay. 2 minutes later. Why do we have toes? You're exhausted. They're not actually learning. They're just collecting answers they'll forget. With the curiosity reflect method. Why do birds fly? You say, great question. Why do you think? They pause. Maybe because they have wings? You say, yes. And why do wings help? They think. Because they push the air? You smile. That's really good thinking. Should we watch a video about how wings work? They're excited because they were part of the discovery. That's the difference. Here's what just happened in those 2 minutes. You validated their curiosity without performing an answer. Their brain registered, my thinking matters. You reflected the question back. Their prefrontal cortex activated. They practiced problem solving. You waited. Their brain built neural pathways for patience and hypothesis generation. You validated their thinking process. Dopamine reinforced the behavior of thinking, not just asking. You invited collaborative discovery. They learned that learning is something they participate in, not something done to them. You didn't just answer a question, you taught them how to think. But here's what matters most. You're not just changing how they ask questions. You're changing how their brain approaches problems. When a child learns that questions get answers from others, they develop external locus of control. The solution is out there. Someone else has it. I just need to find the right person to ask. When a child learns that questions are invitations to think, they develop internal locus of control. I can figure this out. I can generate ideas. I can test and explore and discover. One creates dependence. The other creates independence. But here's the real payoff. You're building the foundation for lifelong learning. Over time, sometimes in just 2 weeks, you'll notice the questions change. Instead of, why is the sky blue? They start asking, I wonder why the sky is blue. Do you think it's because of the air? They're not asking you to perform. They're inviting you to think with them. Instead of 200 questions a day, you get 20 deeper questions. Questions that lead to real conversations, real exploration, real connection. By age 7, your child doesn't need you to answer everything. Because you've taught them how to think through problems, generate ideas, and seek out answers themselves. That's not just a smarter kid. That's a confident, curious, independent thinker. Now, I know what you're thinking. What if I don't know the answer? What if they ask something really complex? What if they get frustrated that I'm not answering? Let me walk you through what actually happens. Day 1. You try this method. Your child asks, why do cars have wheels? You say, great question. Why do you think? They stare at you. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. They're confused. This is new. You usually perform the answer. You stay calm. Well, let's think about it together. What do wheels do? They might get frustrated. Just tell me. That's okay. That's not failure. That's them testing whether the old pattern still works. You hold the boundary gently. I love that you're curious. Let's figure it out together. Day 3. They ask, why do we have eyebrows? You say, why do you think? This time, they pause. They think for a second. Maybe to keep sweat out of our eyes? You light up. That's brilliant thinking. Let's look it up and see if you're right. They're starting to trust that thinking is safe. Day 5. They ask, why do stars twinkle? Before you even respond, they add, I think maybe it's because they're far away and the air makes them look wiggly. You smile because they're not waiting for you anymore. They're thinking first. Week 2. The questions slow down, not because they're less curious, because they're doing more of the thinking themselves before they even ask. This isn't about withholding information. It's about building thinking skills. Most parents report that within 2 weeks, their children start problem solving independently in other areas, figuring out how toys work, trying solutions before asking for help, generating ideas instead of waiting for instructions. Let me tell you what this looks like 3 years from now. Your child is in 2nd grade. The teacher assigns a project. Research an animal and present what you learned. Half the class goes home and asks their parents, what should I do? What animal should I pick? How do I start? Your child comes home and says, I'm doing octopuses because I wonder if they're smarter than people think. I'm going to find 3 books and watch 2 videos. And I think I'll make a poster, but I might change my mind. The teacher emails you. I don't know what you're doing at home, but your child is one of the most independent learners I've ever seen. You smile because you know. For 3 years, you didn't give them answers. You gave them something better. You taught them how to think. Every time you reflected a question back, you made a deposit. Every time you validated their hypothesis instead of correcting it, you built their confidence. Every time you invited discovery instead of delivering information, you showed them learning is something they do, not something done to them. Now, they're not just smart. They're curious, confident, and capable. And it doesn't stop there. Homework becomes easier because they don't wait for you to explain. They try strategies first. Friendships get deeper because they've learned to wonder about others' perspectives instead of assuming. Problem solving becomes natural because you've trained their brain to generate options instead of waiting for instructions. You'll hear them talking to themselves. I wonder why this isn't working. Maybe if I try this way, or maybe this. That's not just intelligence. That's metacognition. Thinking about thinking. So here's your challenge. The next time your child asks why, and it'll probably be in the next 10 minutes, I want you to try something radical. Don't answer, don't explain, don't perform. Just say, great question. Why do you think? And wait. Watch what their brain does. Remember those 200 why questions a day from the beginning? The ones that were exhausting you? With the curiosity reflect method, they're still curious. They're still asking. They're still exploring. But you're not a search engine anymore. You're a thinking partner. And your child learns something more valuable than facts. They learn that their brain is powerful. That questions are beginnings, not endings. That thinking is something they can do, not something they wait for someone else to do for them. And that changes everything. Try it. Come back. Tell me what they came up with. You've got this.